Transportation, and you can visit their website. You can just Google SUSTRANS UK and it'll come up. They've been doing this work probably, well, since the 1970s, late 70s. And I met a chap in Toronto who was basing his master's thesis on the SUSTRANS model and trying to get some Safe Route to School stuff going in Toronto. But he wanted to be paid quite a lot of money, and of course schools don't have money to pay for this stuff. So I chatted with him and said, well, after you've done your master's, would you be willing to hand this over and I'll see if I can have a go at it, because I have nothing else to do. I don't have a job anymore. So let's see what we can do with it. So we got a grant from the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. And to our knowledge, this school, Morris Coady Public School in Toronto, was the first walking school bus in Canada. That was in 95, 96 that we got this going. Our very small grant allowed us to have a look at working with 3 schools in Toronto on this Safe Routes to School idea. And we really thought that it would be difficult to find schools that would be interested in doing this. In fact, they were lining up at the door because it turned out that a lot of parents were concerned about the traffic congestion, the air pollution, and other things that were going on. Next slide. So we continued to work on this project in Toronto with the 3 schools. It was quite successful. 2 of those 3 schools actually still have the program up and running in their schools. And have done a lot of work in the area of active transportation. But then the program started to grow, and I discovered, I guess in 96, the end of 96, beginning of 97, that there was a program getting started in Vancouver. And that was when I made my first connection with the Way to Go School program, which is what it became in British Columbia. And, excuse me while I just get some water. So Bernadette Cowie and myself got together and had this whole initiative going around this Safe Routes to School program. We then were approached by an organization called Go for Green to see if we wanted to take this program national. And we said, sure, why not, let's do it. In 1998, we were approached by some people in Chicago who were doing the first International Walk to School Day. Most of you have probably heard about International Walk to School Day. It takes place usually at the first Wednesday in October. Just recently it seems to be the second Wednesday in October. At the time when we started it, we had 50 schools in Toronto that did it. We had a few schools in Vancouver, and that was pretty much it, with the mayor of Chicago declaring this as something that he really wanted to do. And I think Chicago was probably the first American city to really embrace the Safe Routes to School movement. And what was interesting was that the chap who got it started in Chicago was the same person that did his master's degree in Toronto on Safe Routes to School, and that I took the program over from in Toronto. So our paths continued to cross, and to this date we still continue to cross, which is really interesting. So Bernie and I were working away. We started doing Walk to School Day, and then slowly we started to see more things happening across the province, across Canada. The thing that's interesting about the Safe Routes to School program, though, in Canada that's different from other countries, is that we're all doing this as nonprofits. It's pretty much driven, and here even in Manitoba, with the Green Action Centre being a nonprofit organization. But it's always been intriguing to me how one person with one idea can actually make significant change. And so a lot of what Bernie and I did back then in the early days is certainly set the groundwork for what we're seeing today. So some of the other parts of the program that you may have heard about are different walking challenges, like walk once a week, walk on Wednesdays, walking school buses, which have become quite popular. The I Walk Club we started in Ontario, and the whole concept of not having your engines running while you're lining up, all those cars lined up at the school with their engines running. As of 2005, there were 40 countries around the world that were involved in the Safe Routes to School movement and an International Walk to School Day. So Jacky also mentioned Walk 21. Back in 2004, the Walk 21 conference. It's the only international conference on walking in the world. It started in 2000, and Walk 21 stands for Walking Forward in the 21st Century. And the first conference took place in London, an idea put together by some folks from different countries across Europe who said, well, maybe we should have a conference on walking. In the entire 20th century, there was not one international conference on walking. Since 2000, there has been one every year, and each year it's hosted by a different country. So Bernadette and I got to go to the Copenhagen conference in 2004, and we got to talk about our programs and the work that we were doing here in Canada. And it was really exciting. There were 17 representatives from New Zealand. There were about 27 from America. There were loads of people from Europe. But what really got to me was that there were more people at this conference from Africa than there were from Canada. Bernie and I were the only 2 Canadians at this conference. And what that did for me was it highlighted that walking and walkability issues just weren't on the agenda. We had no representation from our federal government, none of the provincial governments were represented, and none of our major municipalities, major cities were represented, in contrast to what we were seeing, representation from around the world. So being the kind of person that I am, I said we have to change this, because clearly walking is so important to everything that we do, but it's just hidden in Canada, and we need to change that. And I guess what really inspired me was the fact that there were so many people there from America and so few from Canada. Now this is an old slide. It goes back to 1995, but coincidentally this week, if you've read the paper, StatsCan just released results from a study that they did a couple of years ago. You know, it takes them a couple of years to crunch all those numbers before they actually release the reports. And back in '95, and this slide was actually put together by a colleague of mine for the Walkability Roadshow from the UK. The modal share there for walking was probably about, it looks like it's about 10%, maybe a little less than 10%. And I think in the newspaper, the StatsCan report was it was less than 7% now. So the number has actually continued to go down since 1995. And that's for adults, and for children it wasn't much better either. So although we're supposed to be doing something physically active every day for 60 minutes, which can be accumulated over the day, you don't have to do it in one go. In fact, many of us are not doing that, and in particular for our children, and we all know what the risks are of that, and we're starting to see that right now. Next slide. So I'm working with Walk 21, and my colleague Dr. Rodney Tully, who's the director of Walk 21 and responsible for the program committee, I borrowed some of these slides from him. That walking is sustainable transport. If you don't have walking, then chances are you're not going to have much cycling or much of anything else, because walking really is at the heart of everything. If you don't have any walking, you're probably not going to have any transit, because every transit journey starts and ends with a walking trip. And yet, when we count walking, or we count trips, if any of you have ever had to do those family surveys where you talk about the trips that you make or do a travel diary, and say, well, how do you get to work? Say, well, we take transit. We take the bus, or take the subway, or whatever. It gets counted as one transit trip. But in actual fact, it's 2 walking trips and 1 transit trip. If the walking part is never counted, it's invisible. And yet walking is the most sustainable form of transportation because it doesn't use up a lot of space. It doesn't burn any fossil fuels. And we heard recently about, you know, when you're driving